So today I thought I would start a series on the last of the Chronicles of Narnia books. The last book being The Last Battle. It has probably been about 35 years since I have last read this. I was thinking about that the other day. Thinking back to, when was the last time I read this? And it was back when I was a kid. And actually, most of the books have been back when I was a kid that I'd read them. Maybe here and there throughout the years, up to the point where I'm at now. But of course, most of them, as they are, written for children. I think that was the target audience that C.S. Lewis was looking for, was writing them to children. So it has been quite a while since I've read most of them. And I would definitely say, though, for this one, 35 years probably since I've last read this book. And the reason being that, as I told the kids the other day, this book is a sad book. That was my perception going out of the last reading of it, so many decades ago now. It was a sad book, I thought, at the time. Reading it now, yes, still there's some elements of sadness, but then at the same time there's, it is the culmination of all the stories of Narnia. And there is joy and happiness that you find in the book as well. The reason that you find it sad, I think, especially as a child, is that you get a sense of place, a sense of the importance of place within the book. Narnia, the children that enter Narnia, the Pevensey children. I was going to say Diggory and Polly, probably a little bit there as well, but I'm thinking of Eustace and Jill Pole, Eustace Scrubb, Jill Pole. When they enter Narnia, there's different aspects and elements as you read through the books that tie them to the place. As they're going about their adventures in Narnia and the surrounding lands, there's a draw for them, a pull for them to that place, to Narnia. And I think similarly, you see that as you read these books as a kid. You get a sense, that sense that the kids feel of being drawn or being pulled to the place, to Narnia, of it being a place of importance to them. Definitely we see that in different aspects. I wish I could say, pull out some passages here or there, but I can think of, for example, in Prince Caspian, when they have returned to Narnia, and the joy that they feel inside, in discovering, this is the ruins of Cair Paravel. You really get the sense of the joy that they feel. Or say when Edmund and Lucy go back to Narnia into the sea and rescued by the crew of the Dawn Treader, they have this joy of being back, of being in Narnia again. Even though they might not be in Narnia, they are still in Aslan's place. So I think likewise, as children reading the book, kids will develop that same type of attraction and pull towards Narnia. It's a wonderful, magical place. It's a place, that they've entered through this wardrobe. And can you imagine, entering another world, another realm through a wardrobe? It's, to read that as a child, it's like, what child would not, want to discover a place like that? It's just magical, So when reading The Last Battle as a child, and you have to read through the passages where Narnia is destroyed, the land that you love as a child, that you've discovered and you've returned to again and again through the 7 books, and you discover and you find that it's been destroyed, that it ceases to be. That's a sad thing, It's not only in Narnia itself, but the book itself. It is the 7th book of the series. Whether you look at it chronologically or publication, it's still the 7th book. It is the last book. There is nothing beyond this book. and as a child, it comes to the conclusion of that series. It comes to the conclusion of the country itself. Of that magical place of Narnia. It's done. It's over, and it can be a sad thing. So that fed into the reason why I hadn't read it in a long time. When I read it, maybe just a couple times, 3 times as a child, it was a book that I was like, I don't. There's adventure in it, sure, but there's also this element of sadness to know that Narnia is no more. I read it not too long ago as an adult, and like I said, I feel an element of sadness, but then there's also the element of joy and culmination of all things being wrapped up in the book. And maybe I overlooked that as a child. But it's important to see that. It's also important, I think, as a child to identify that there is that joy that is waiting for us. As usual, I made notations as I went through the book of different things. So let's take a look at those now. First one on page 25. There's a passage that I notated. It said, "Suddenly the king leaned hard on his friend's neck and bowed his head. 'Jewel,' he said, 'what lies before us? Horrible thoughts arise in my heart. If we had died before today, we would have been happy.' 'Yes,' said Jewel, 'we have lived too long. The worst thing in the world has come upon us.' And they stood like that for a minute or two, and then went on. And I would say I underlined that because in some ways I see the world in those terms now. Just the hardships that the world is going through, the difficulties, the abhorrence and the evil and wickedness that we see out in the world. Just like Tyrion and Jewel were seeing in Narnia at the time. Horrible thoughts, it says that Tyrion was thinking. The worst thing in the world has come upon us, Jewel said. And it's easy to see that in this world today. And maybe it's been that way for a long time, in different generations. But as an adult, again, going back to that adult-child juxtaposition, it's easy to see that as an adult, that there are horrible, things happening in the world, and we wish that it was not so. We wish that it was not like this. There is pollution and destruction of different things that we hold dear, that we love. So that's probably why that passage was called out to me. The next passage, well, I have a few pages written down for this one. I don't know that I'll read through a few pages worth, but we'll take a look at it and see. I have an arrow here notating from one paragraph and down. So let's take a look at what I indicated. 40 page 48 to 51. It starts with actually 48 to 52, which is the end of the chapter. And that chapter is, I will tell it, let's see, chapter 4, What Happened That Night. So it starts with, he thought of other kings, this being Tyrion, King Tyrion, the last king, thought of other kings who had lived and died in Narnia in old times, and it seemed to him that none of them had ever been so unlucky as himself. He thought of his great-grandfather's great-grandfather, King Rilian, who had been stolen away by a witch when he was only a young prince, kept hidden for years in the dark caves beneath the land of the northern giants. So this being, of course, the story of King or Prince Rilian of the Silver Chair. But then it all came all right in the end, for two mysterious children suddenly appeared from a land beyond the world's end and rescued him, so that he came home to Narnia and had a long and prosperous reign. It's not like that with me, thought Tyrion to himself. And he went further back and thought about Rilian's father, Caspian the Seafarer, whose wicked uncle, King Muriz, had tried to murder him, and how Caspian fled away into the woods and lived amongst the dwarves. But that story too had come all right in the end, for Caspian also had been helped by children. Only there were 4 of them that time, who came from somewhere beyond the world and fought a great battle and set him on his father's throne. Of course, that being the story of the book of Prince Caspian. But that was all long ago, thought Tyrion to himself, and that sort of thing doesn't happen now. I think I'll stop there, but it goes on, it talks about the history of Narnia and the different pictures and images that Caspian replays to himself. Thinking about all the good times that happened and the blessings and the benefits that came from it, and the salvation, the salvation that came in those troublesome times. And it truly makes me think of the different psalms you read. We read through the Psalms some time ago, and the different psalms, as you read through the whole book of Psalms, you'll come across these psalms here and there, as you go through, of the relaying of the history, of God's people, the retelling, of all the history, the involvement, or I guess I would say the involvement that God, reached down into his people's history and rescued them in different ways. The story of Joseph, the story of the flight from Egypt, the stories of Moses leading the children through the wilderness. It really struck me in that way, when I read through this, because it is a man looking back on the history of his people and seeing how salvation, through the guidance of Aslan, came to his people. And then the last one that I noted was page 111, and let's see what that one says. Yes. This strikes me of a passage, of a brief passage in The Lord of the Rings, but let's read this here. Dear King, said the unicorn, I could almost wish you had, so that I might forgive it. Meaning a harm that Tyrion had possibly done. Anyway, farewell, says the unicorn. We have known great joys together. If Aslan had given me my choice, I would choose no other life than the life I have had, and no other death than the one we now go into. And this is said by Jewel the unicorn, as they are entering the last battle, knowing that they most likely will not come out of it alive. Also, of course, within the context of knowing that Narnia is collapsing, the Calormenes are invading, the faith, of the beasts and the dwarves are being lost. The questioning of, is Aslan real? What is our place in this world? And I said it reminds me of a passage in The Lord of the Rings, and that being when Frodo says, "Oh, I wish the ring had never come to me," and Gandalf says to him, "So do all who live to see such times." A catastrophe. It's a very difficult time that Frodo has to live through, to walk through. Not only that, he has the burden of the ring himself upon him, and I can imagine, he would not, he would not want that burden, why did he have to live to see such times? But Gandalf reminds him, so do all who live to see such times, but it is not for them to decide. They're what they have to decide is how they're going to live with the time that has been given to them. And it reminds me of, or I should say, this passage has reminded me of that, and that has always been a dear passage to me. again, going back to what I was saying, when we look at the world, we look at the destruction and the evilness and wickedness that's in the world today. It's like, why do we have to live in such times? But it is comforting, I guess, when you think, well, we have been called to live in such times, and we can take comfort in that fact, knowing that there is a higher power that is guiding us through these times. Just like God led His people, in all of His history, through the difficulties, as David and others recount in the Psalms. So too we can think about those things and have comfort and have trust and faith and hope. I think hope being the biggest word. Hope that God will continue to lead us and guide us, even in these wicked, troublesome times. So there is going into the reading of this book, there's a couple things that I thought about, or that I remembered, I should say, from my last reading of it as a child. Again, decades ago, 30 plus years ago. There are a couple of things that I remember from the book, just odd, obscure things. One being, at one passage, it said that Rillian was able to wake himself up whenever he wanted to, or whenever he needed to. And that's all I really remembered about that passage as a child. And I don't know why that struck me as a kid, but it did, and it stuck with me all these years. In context, when I read it again, recently, in context, it was more in terms of Rillian and the Tyrion and Jill and Eustace going back to the tower for refuge, and they had to camp overnight in the tower, and it talked about how Tyrion being a warrior, one trained in battle and one trained in just rugged living. He was able to, whenever he needed to wake up, he was able to wake up at that time. If it was 4 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, he was able to wake up at that time, which it's cool. I wish I could do that. But I remember that as a kid, and I mean, I don't know why it struck me, but it did. And the next thing that I remember, it's an odd thing, but something that I remember is in the very end, or not the very end, but very close to the end, when Narnia has been covered over with ice, all of Narnia's been destroyed, the sea has come in, overswept all the land, and then the sun has gone out and everything has turned to ice. Again, the sad picture of the destruction of Narnia. But Aslan tells Peter to close the door, close the stable door, so Peter reaches out. He closes the door, and the door is scraping across the ice, it says. It's just, as little pictures like that, it's just odd that I would remember that as a child, the picture of the door scraping across the ice. And I don't know why it is. There's nothing more really, no details about it in the book, as in my subsequent reading lately. It's just a comment, something that Lewis adds in there, as a descriptive comment, I suppose. But I remember that as a kid, and I just found it interesting. So this other passage that Lewis wrote, let's see. Let's see if I can find it. I wish I had written it down, but let's see if I can find it. We'll see how well I remember the book after having just read it. Let's see. They had gotten to the tower. They had left the tower. They had. Here we go. I think this is it. Oh yes. Yeah, I just turned right to it. Thankfully, I found it pretty quickly. Here it is. Okay, the very sentence that I was thinking, or that I noted when I was reading through this, I found it interesting that Lewis would write this. I'll go back and start from the beginning of the paragraph. This is after they realized that they no longer need to keep their Kellerman disguise as they had They had put some I forget what it was, some pitch or something on their faces to turn their skin darker, so that they could blend in with the Kellermans if they needed to. And once they'd realized they no longer needed that disguise, they went to wash it off. So it says, Tyrion said that they had better remove their disguises, as they didn't want to be mistaken for Calormenes, and perhaps attacked by any loyal Narnians that they might meet. The dwarf made up a horrid-looking mess of ashes from the hearth, and grease out of the jar of grease which was kept for rubbing on swords and spearheads. Then they took off their Calormene armor and went down to the stream. The nasty mixture made of lather just like soft soap. And it was here's the passage. It was a pleasant, homely sight to see Tyrion and the two children kneeling beside the water and scrubbing the backs of their necks or puffing and blowing as they splashed the lather off. Then they went back to the tower with red, shiny faces, looking like people who had been giving an extra good wash before a party. What I found interesting was his statement, that it was a pleasant, homely sight to see Tyrion and the two children kneeling beside the water and scrubbing the backs, etc. And it made me ask, why was it a pleasant, homely sight? Why did Lewis write that in there? He could have easily, foregone with those terms, with those words, pleasant, homely sight. He could have simply written in there. The two children knelt beside the water and scrubbed the backs of their necks, and puffed and blowed as they splashed the lather off. You could have put it in past tense, but he chose to say it was a pleasant, homely sight. And it almost makes me think that, Lewis himself, as he's writing the book, and I find this in some of my own writings that I do, I really catch on an image, that I enjoy, and I really want to capture that image in writing. And for some reason, it almost sounds like that Lewis, he caught upon this image of the king and the two children kneeling beside the stream, and splashing, the water on their faces to wash that off, and maybe scrubbing their arms, scrubbing their necks, just getting all that stuff washed off. To me, there's nothing special about that. It's just an event in the book, in the chain of events that are happening in the book. But for some reason, Lewis said it was a pleasant, homely sight, for them to be doing that, to see them there doing that. Other than Pagan, I'm sure no one else saw that. So, Lewis is calling our attention to that. He's probably thinking, since there was no other characters in the book that saw that other than Pagan, Lewis is calling the reader's attention to that. He's saying, look, this is a pleasant, homely sight, that the Tyrion and the children are washing by the stream. And, I could think of other more interesting sights in the book, really. One, maybe the images from their camp at the tower, for example, or images from when they enter Aslan's country. There are more colorful, more beautiful images, that you could see in the book. But here, Lewis is choosing to say a pleasant, homely sight about washing by the stream. And I just think that's it's something that was important to him, something that was special to him. Maybe in the same way that image of the door scraping across the ice was to me. Maybe there was something in the image that he really enjoyed, that struck home to him. He really, he wanted to write it into the book, and he wanted to write it in a way that called our attention as readers to it. So I'll wrap up this video for this book. If you haven't read the book, hopefully some of the highlights and the insights that I had as I went through the book we found interesting. There's depth in the book that I discovered after reading it after so many decades. There's depth, and there's interest in the scenes that are laid out, the kind of the culmination of all the book's as we saw with that passage where Tyrion was recounting to himself the history of Narnia. It's almost like that was a good element to add to the book that Lewis wrote into the book. Because it really gives maybe a closure to the whole story of Narnia. And I guess in thinking about it though, there's also it isn't closed. At the very end of the book, we see how all the children, Diggory and Polly, all of the inhabitants of Narnia have entered into Aslan's country, and within Aslan's country there are elements of Narnia. Actually, I should say beyond elements. There are the important parts of Narnia that make it what it was, made it special to the children as they knew it. And so as they entered Aslan's country, they could see all those things. And someone made a comment, I don't remember who in the book, it said that it's as if Narnia, the place that they knew, was merely a shadow of what they found in Aslan's country. So again, I found the book enjoyable after reading it after so long. And again, yes, there's elements of sadness, but in the very end, there's the bright hope of the everlasting place of Aslan's country. Thank you for watching.